This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
It's great to see all of you here tonight. And our topic is Let Go and Live the Extraordinary Life. And I think that every human being wants to be extraordinary. And we all have all our plans and methods that we're going to use to become extraordinary. But when you think about it, if I have an ordinary mind, what plan could this ordinary mind ever come up with that would lead to something extraordinary? And when you look at the world and people who we call extraordinary and you see what their lives are really like, you realize that what people call extraordinary leads to very ordinary actions in relationships and everyday lives. What we want is something genuine extraordinariness, if there is such a word. And clearly what that is has got to be something different from what we normally think it is. And in fact, wouldn't it be something if being extraordinary, truly being extraordinary, would be to not have a special position or a special possession or to be anything that the world sees as being extraordinary, but in every moment of your life, no matter what you were doing, no matter how ordinary it appeared to be, working in your garden or eating your dinner or driving down the road, if even in those ordinary moments you could be having an extraordinary experience. Isn't that what a truly extraordinary life is? That every moment, no matter what it involved, was an extraordinary experience. And it's that kind of extraordinary experience that Guy Finley has been telling people about for more than 25 years. He is the author of more than 30 books and audio albums, teaching these wonderful, helpful, life-transforming principles. These works have been translated into 13 different languages. And we just so happen to have a nice assortment of his wonderful books and tape albums, all in English, not in the other 12 languages, that I urge you to look at before you leave and take something home with you, to take these principles with you. And if you purchase a book tonight, Guy will be happy to autograph it for you. Let's see. Guy is also obviously internationally known, but we're very fortunate because he lives and teaches right here in Rogue Valley out in Merlin. How many of you know where Merlin is? It's not that far. It's about a 50-minute drive. And he is the founding director of Life of Learning Foundation. It's a wonderful home for people who are looking for true wisdom and inspiration in their lives. Many of us who are here tonight that you see with these little name tags, we're with Life of Learning. And we have classes. Guy teaches 4 times each week out in Merlin. And all the information about the days and the times is in the literature that you have with you. And so, with that, tonight you're going to hear something marvelous. I know that because Guy's talks are always full of encouragement and inspiration and wonderful wisdom. And tonight he's going to tell us how to let go and live the extraordinary life. Here's Guy Finley.
Take a nice deep breath. Whenever I talk, and before each time I talk, I make it a personal practice, and I invite everyone that's with me in the meeting to work diligently at practicing what we're going to be talking about. Because there's no point in talking without practicing. And as we'll see, there's a lot for us to learn, which means there's always something new that waits for us if we're willing to go there. So one more deep breath and we'll get started. I want to tell you a story to set not only the tone for the talk, but to outline a number of the principles that we're going to cover in it. Stories are very, very valuable because they not only reach us at an intellectual level, but if told properly and if we're receptive, they strike certain emotional chords because not only do they touch on some of our own past experience and help us relate to the characters in the story, no matter who they may be, but at the same time, because of that relationship with the story, we're able to bring ourselves more deeply into the material. And I want you at all times, and I'll urge you, and you'll hear me do say, right? I'll say, all right, take a nice deep breath right in the talk, and we'll start over at that moment. So here's the setting. There's a father, mother, and a young child. We'll say she's maybe 4 or 5 years old, a young girl. And they've come from someplace in the Midwest, and it's the first time that they've traveled to a shoreline, a beach, where they're going to stay for a week or so. And it's the first day out on the beach, and the parents are there on their towels, and they've arranged a crib-like device, a cage, I guess. Do you remember being in a cage when you were small? Or was it just me? So, that the child could see through but not crawl through, and that was for the safety of the child. And it was somewhat near the shoreline so that at once the child could have the waters kind of rolling up to the edge of where the crib device was, and at the same time as she was playing in the sand, she could be using the water to build the castles and things that she was building. And when they first got out there and sat down, the parents, they laid down, and the kid was just as happy as a kid could be. Here's the water coming rolling up, and then the father, to set an example of how she could get other water, would dig a hole. Do you remember digging a hole near the beach line and the water would come in the hole? Remember how neat that was? You didn't have to do anything at a certain point. You just dug the hole to a certain point, and then the water would start to cave in the sides. Well, the little girl understood this principle as best she could and was able to use the wet sand. And she began to make for herself a beautiful castle there in the enclosure of her crib. Now, everything was just great, and the parents, keeping an eye but also resting, could hear the child giggling because she had little horses, and she'd run them up along the trail that led up to the top of the castle where the prince was. Do any of you remember this when you were small? How many of you are still waiting for the prince to show up at the top of the castle? But gradually the giggling began to fade out, and the parents would look up from time to time, and the child was losing the happiness and something else was taking its place. And finally the father sat up a little bit and looked to see what was going on. And wife said, "What's up?" She said, "I don't know what's wrong." She sat up, and she, being a little more intuitive, looked over, and what she saw was that the child had established the castle. It had built the nice castle, but during the hour or so that it took to do that, the tide had slightly changed, and the waves that were just once lapping at the edge of the crib were now lapping up at the edge of the castle. And you know what happens when the waters lap at the edge of your castle, don't you? Now keep in mind, this is a metaphor for life, okay? And she could see that the child was worried because there was an intruder in her enclosure. And so she couldn't let that go on unanswered. The child couldn't. And now the child instinctively began to build some sandcastle walls. Do you remember how much fun that was? You would build these elaborate walls in a semicircle around your structure so that when the waters came, the worst they would do was just melt the walls. Then you had the time between the next wave to put the sand back and get the wall in place. Now, am I talking to the right group of people here? Okay, I just want to make sure. But gradually, the child began to lose the war with the waves. And the mother recognized that the child was becoming unhappy and stressed because of the child's placement on the beach and the relationship that the child had at that time with what she had to work with. And so the mother, understanding that the child could only understand what the limitations were of its environment, of what it had been given to work with, and she reached in, she pulled the child out, and she said, "Come on, I want to go show you something." And the mother and the child walked into the ocean. Now, this isn't the North Shore of Maui. This is only small waves. And they walk in about 4, 5, 6 feet to the waist of the mother. And then she holds the child delicately, and she puts the child to the waist in the water. And as the wave would come in, the child's, if you remember this, your legs would go towards the beach, and then when the waves would wash out, the waves would go back towards the ocean. And they stood there for a little while like this, and the mother said, "I know that you're not going to understand this yet, but there will come a time when you will, and I want to set the seed in you now. I know that the waves were destroying what you had built. But I want you to understand that it was only because of the view that you had, where you were and what you understood. And as I hold you here, I want you to see something very clearly. And now everybody come wide awake, because this is critical to our understanding." She said, "There's always the movement in," she said, "and then there's always what seems to be a pause. And then there's a movement out. And then there seems to be a pause, and then there's a movement in again." But the mother said, "I want you to understand that what seems like a pause isn't really a pause at all. It's just a time of change. It's just a moment when that which is moving in one direction by natural law has to move back in another direction. And there's always that moment where things seem to stand still, but nothing, sweetheart, stands still. Nothing stands still." And of course, the little girl looked at Mom, somewhat like some of you are looking at me. Well, what does that mean? What does that have to do with an extraordinary life? And that's what we're going to examine. Because the first thing that I want to put forward to you, and you'll see as the time rolls on as I speak, I have a tendency to get more and more animated until I'm just about coming out of my seat. So there's a relationship that we have to have that depends upon you understanding. All I want to do is tell you about what I have seen. That's all I'm interested in doing. And if what I have seen turns out to be something that resonates either with what you have seen in some way, or that you intuit needs to be seen and is understood as something necessary to be seen because it answers questions that haven't been answered in your life, then we can have something very meaningful take place in this time together. Because there's no such truth as there is no truth that isn't truth for all of us. Period. I don't care what you hear and all the rest of the New Age nonsense about there's this truth and there's that truth. In the end, when it comes to what is extraordinary, there is one truth, and I'll get right to the heart of it now. Where there is fear in a person's life, there cannot be what is extraordinary. And to understand the nature of fear, which is something that we're very want to do, that there's an abhorrence in a human being to understand the nature of fear, because in order to understand the true nature of fear, one must recognize and see the fear that one has in oneself. Fear is not something that we study at a distance. Fear isn't something that we banish with amulets and icons and things that we call upon to save us when things fall apart. The extraordinary life is the understanding of why there's fear in it, and in that understanding being able to dismiss once and for all from that mind, from that nature, that dynamic that produces that kind of darkness that drives men and women the way that it does from pillar to post. So I want to ask you a question. Take a deep breath. And this is sometimes I ask questions, people think, is this a trick question? I have no trick questions. How many of you, if I reach down here and I pull up my glass of water and I said, this glass of water is filled with poisonous toxins. Who wants to drink? Anybody? Then that's, okay, all right, Jeeves, Mr. Speaker, I came here for that. Clear, nobody wants to drink it. Okay, now, I'm going to pour half out, and I'm going to fill with nice, fresh spring water the other half. Who wants to drink now? Anybody? Now, so not to belabor this, let's say I do that 50 times. Pour out half, pour fresh water in. Who wants to drink after the 50th movement? Anybody? No. And the fact of the matter is, if I did it 100 times, 1,000 times, no one would drink from the cup knowingly. Because knowingly that this cup has in it that which compromises or harms the body, we're not going to do it because our instinctive intelligence prohibits that. And what I want to put to you is what about when it comes to fear? Can there be an order of ourself that starts with fear that can never be without fear? That's the question. Because just as this cup, no matter how many times I pour out half and pour half in, will always have the toxic in it, so is the level of self, the order of self that has fear in it, ever tainted by that fear, no matter how many times it pours out half of its content through trying to acquire or achieve or attract something to itself that is going to make it fearless. Now, how many of you are with me so far? Let me see. I do this from time to time. But it's just partially to make sure you're still living, because some of you... What I'm saying to you is that our present life looks at the world around us and our religious, spiritual ideas, whatever they may be, and believes that there is a way in which we can move from what we are presently through a series of ideas and transitions and programs and all the rest of that thing, some kind of an eventual indoctrination, some kind of change that we put ourselves through that changes the essence of the cup. And what I'm stressing and going to show you, and if you'll see it as being true, that this present idea of a life without fear is very different from the fact of a fearless life. Because there is a fearless life. But the fearless life doesn't begin from a life with fear. We don't reach a fearless life through a life that has fear in it. Because anytime a human being looks out and feels as though he or she is threatened by something, and it can be the subtlest thing in the world. It can be someone just saying, I don't agree with you spiritually. How many of you get upset when people don't agree with you spiritually? And you better raise your hands, because I know you do. One of the earmarks of a fearful person is the hypocrisy they don't see in themselves when life challenges them and they have to retreat into a defensive position that they arm with a smile. The extraordinary life has nothing whatsoever to do with any of that kind of behavior, because there's nothing in the extraordinary life that's trying to prove itself to anyone or anything for any purpose whatsoever. Which is, again, the earmark of fear. Fear is always hoping that something or someone will come along to validate or otherwise approve what we've done and become in our lives. Which means that even when we achieve things, we're still at the mercy of the individuals around us whose approval we've received, because should we lose it, then we'll lose the validation that they gave to us. And who's free that seeks approval? What kind of life is it when a man or a woman has to walk around and every action of their behavior is measured according to the reactions of people around them? There can't be freedom in that. There's nothing extraordinary about nothing extraordinary in that except the amount of stress. Now, I'm saying what I'm saying, and I told the story that I'm told, and I'm going to touch on the story back and forth, because the little girl in the story and the parent who is representing here Sophia, wisdom, intelligence, spiritual understanding, that little girl at a certain point, she was having a bang-up time. How many hands? Ever have a bang-up time? And then he does what? She says what? The environment does what? Politically, socially, economically. And all of a sudden, my castle, the waves are washing up. And what was the most fulfilling possible experience that I knew to have? And that's the other thing. I want to get this in, because I know some people say, well, you seem awfully intense. And I am. Absolutely. You have no idea. This is throttled back 10,000%. When we do what we do, no one is saying that we're not doing the best we know to do. I mean, no one says, today I'm going to do my half best. We don't. I mean, even when you wake up negative and you look out and, spiritual schmirichal, I don't know, go away, leave me alone. I just want to be by myself. I want to eat something and I want to take another nap. Whatever the case may be, that's the best that man or woman can do in that moment, because they've run into a wall of resistance that they're blaming on conditions outside of themselves. And there's certain states of darkness, and it is an accurate word, meaning unenlightened. There are states of darkness acting inside of them, and they don't know what they are, and they don't know what to do in those moments with those states. And so the individual responds to the states with the best thing that he or she knows to do, which, by the way, is always handed to them by the state. Darkness will always tell you exactly what to do with darkness. That's how it works. You'll see when we're done here that there's absolutely nothing to be done with these dark states. Nothing to be done with them, which is how we approach the extraordinary life, but we'll get to that. So I want to make that clear right from the top here. We're not talking, no one's sitting here and judging anyone. Don't you judge yourselves, because sometimes we all fall down. And when we fall down, so what? You get up, meaning that you don't fall down into you're falling down and then fall down into that, and on it goes. So when we do the best we can, what it means, and here's a very important point relative to the talk, I have gone as far as I know to go at this point. I have nothing in me that is conscious to me at the moment when I am doing what is defeating myself, because if I had it, I wouldn't be doing it. But the fact that I defeat myself doesn't mean that all there is living inside of me is a nature that can only respond to a challenge with something that puts him in conflict. It just means, and to the point of the little girl, it means that she had gone as far as what that enclosure allowed her. And so the limitation is the actual invitation to something beyond the enclosure. But if we avoid and ignore or deny the limitation, which is what we love to do, then every time that we look out and we meet a moment in which we don't know what to do, we don't know who we are, we feel the fear or whatever the condition is, instead of going into the phony baloney act of being someone who isn't touched by such things, Do you know you'll never grow if you're not touched by such things? And you'll never grow if you don't know you're touched by those things, and then what to do in those moments. And this is what we're talking about. We recognize, okay, this is as far as I know how to go. It isn't as far as there is to go. It just means that what I have been up to this point cannot take me farther. But there is farther to go, and everyone knows there's farther to go just by the awareness of the limitation. So here's this little girl, and at the moment that this limitation is recognized and the experience proves itself to be not fulfilling anymore, then comes mother, comes wisdom. And wisdom recognizes this condition and takes the child into another condition in which, under the exact same laws, she will experience eventually the same limitation. But what happens to us when we meet those moments where the enclosure is too evident? Where the relationship isn't working out, where our plans are dashed by whatever it is that happens, where the depression comes back or the regret that we can't shake, whatever it is, when the wall of that takes place around us, we don't wait for wisdom. We don't even know mostly what it means to wait for wisdom. Instead, we turn to our own directives. We turn to solutions that our mind hands us that promise to save us from our suffering, never seeing that if that nature had the way out, we wouldn't be sitting there in the enclosure. How many understand what I'm saying so far? Good. I'll try to slow it down a little bit. So the question is this: can we understand so clearly what it means to have this life with fear in it, that because we can see the very fact of it, the nature of it, and not because somebody says it to us, and not because we read it in a book, but because we ourselves have become so vitally interested in understanding what it takes to move past, how about this? I'll say it differently. We have become interested in experiencing what it is that we know God put us on this planet to experience, which is not to live in a world that is encircled by states of fear, protected by a mind that generates those fears, but to actually see for ourselves what it is that we've been living from, what it has produced on this planet in terms of our personal relationships, as well as the products of the world that we buy in order to escape those pains. And then for the clarity of our vision, move instead of from this, what I'm using, and this is, I had to choose words, instead of a life moving, try to get to a life without fear, where this fearful reaction, this moment of worry, this pain, where it chooses for me what to do, to move into a completely different order of life. A completely different order of life that I'm calling a fearless life, that doesn't start with fear in it, therefore it doesn't have to deal with what fear says needs to be done in order to complete itself. So to understand that requires on our part a kind of watchfulness, a kind of interest, to tell you the truth. Many people aren't terribly interested in reaching what is the evident limitation of this order of our present self, because there is so many ways in which this same level of ourself comes up with a new plan. There's always the next retreat, the next book, the next person who's going to say something, the next feather I'm going to get slapped on the head with, or whatever the path may be, a person, the next glass of carrot juice. I don't know. And I'm not denigrating the path. What I'm saying is that the darkness that drives us along that needs to be understood if we're going to change the kind of human beings we are and live from another order of ourselves. So we have two things to do in this talk now. We have to first understand, well, what is it exactly that's going on? that's producing this experience of mine wherein, and I can see it, I may not be anxious to see it, but where I can see that basically I'm walking along, I'm doing okay, I feel pretty good, and then something happens, and my mind, as fast as I can, before I know it, my mind is delivering me from the problem. It has identified it, it has cleared the path, it has set the desire in place, I'm filled with the sensation of the promise of it, and I'm off. And I've been doing that for 5,000 years. Never suspecting that no matter how many different ways I'm promised the end of that pain, if the pain is in the mix making the promise, it can't bring an end to itself. And it is in the mix because it's part of that order, it's part of that level of mind. So let's look at it, because this is, again, in the story, and we'll get back to it. We have to change. And when I say change, I'm not talking about changing just the way we think about things, because how many of you are pretty good thinkers when you're not sinking? But come the sinking time, the thinking changes, doesn't it? You know, many of us are masters when there's no problems. As soon as a problem comes, the mastery leaves, and we're in the hands of something that promises to master our lives for us, and we don't change ourselves. And the reason that it's important to touch on this is because our world is sinking. It is. It's sinking. This isn't negative. It's sinking. We've become a race of beings whose sense of satisfaction is a derivative of what we can own. That's what's happened to us. Now, for the sake of those who are wondering, I'm not denigrating any kind of position at all in life. But I am proving that inside of the way in which we presently look at life, which is through a kind of conspicuous consumption consciousness, that everything about what we do is basically blind to the effect it has on the world around us. Because what we want is what we want. And what it costs to the rest of the world or anyone else, it doesn't matter to us, because we think to ourselves, our part is so small that none of that really adds up. But I tell you that it does add up, not just in a cumulative way to the planet, but it adds up in a very distinct spiritual, unseen way, in which everyone wanders around carrying a certain kind of debt. It's an unseen debt, but it's there. And the idea of this way in which we presently look at how to make ourselves content through acquiring and possessing things doesn't work. It doesn't work. I know it's a brief high. Let's get it out on the table. You know, you've been thinking to yourself, I want this or I want that, and you've wanted it for a long time, or maybe you're fortunate you don't have to want stuff for a long time, and you get it. It's pretty cool. You know, it is. It's not bad for a spell. But how many of you recognize that as soon as you get whatever it is, it's not terribly long before what you have gotten gets into you and says, this ain't it, let's get something else? Yes or no? It's true. So, I'm saying, can we use our minds? Can we look at this apart from the reactions or the resistance we have to the fact of what it means to be us on this world and what we've done to it, and look and say, you know what? My path to contentment is the same as the path of conflict with the world in which I'm seeking that contentment. There it is. Because I am in conflict with anyone that challenges what I say I need in order to feel that contentment. Is there a different way? Is there another kind of life whose basis is not oriented around the idea of acquisition and possession, but rather around what we'll call participation? Not acquisition, not possession, participation. Is there something that a human being already has within his or her heart that allows them to be in this relationship called life, not only with themselves, but with everyone else around them and Mother Nature herself, so that that relationship doesn't produce pain or punishment to themselves or anyone else, and at the same time, and much to the heart of the talk, gives that man or woman a sense of well-being that is not determined by whether they have or don't have, whether people approve or don't approve, whether things go right or things go wrong. Because none of those ideas of have, not have, right or wrong, approve or not, every one of those is connected with the idea of possession. How many of you can see that was a bit of a leap? See, if you don't approve me, then I must not be who I take myself to be. So I was possessing this image of myself as being a certain kind of person. You've challenged it. Now I got to go back to the workshop. And across the board, if you examine this that we're talking about, you'll see that our mentality, our sense of self, keep in mind the heart of this talk is there a fearless life versus a life of fear that's trying to bring an end to it? That the very core of us, the way our mind works, produces fear. I'm going to show it to you. Nothing I ever speak about do I speak without showing the facts behind it. And I would add, if you ever listen to someone, or you go someplace, or you read a book, and you get a bunch of highfalutin, fancy schmancy, pie-in-the-sky stuff, and it makes you feel good, but there's nothing through which you can see directly in your own heart the fact of the evidence produced, I say that you're not doing yourself or anyone else any good, because change is now. By the way, take a nice deep breath. What is it in us? How does it work? What happens that turns us into a creature whose sense of self is validated by what we possess, whether it's our name, the way people think of us, the kind of things we own, the kind of work we do, because these are the highlights for human beings on planet Earth, and God help the rest of the world trying to be like the West. So I want to look at this with you. I want to show you some of the interior workings of our own mind. And in looking at it, to begin to understand how this fearful life is actually inherent in the activity of our own mind. Why? Because when we see the limitation in something, the invitation is inherent in it. So that the mind that can awaken to itself and see its own activity as being necessarily limited, even though it has been the path to experience up to this point, that same mind in awakening to itself transcends itself by the very fact of its discovery. Then there's no you or anybody else showing some path to some place. The path is unfolding in the very ability of myself to see the functionality of my own being and how it, in this instance, produces fear. So, take a deep breath. I want to talk for a minute about beauty. Our time is going very quickly. We're very fortunate to live where we live. Beautiful part of the country. And I dare say there's no one listening that doesn't have a love of beauty in their heart. But beauty, like everything else on this planet, I have a saying that we find the celestial in the common. That like everything else, beauty is a kind of messenger that contained in its very existence is evidence of something that is beyond its existence. And that the path in the moment for the individual aware of such things as this beauty that we're going to talk about, such a person, by their relationship with that beauty, is placed in relationship with what gives rise to that. Now, where I live up here in Southern Oregon, just outside of Grants Pass, we have we have some beautiful giant trees, the incense cedar and the Douglas fir, the sugar pines. And we've had a beautiful spring, lots of water, and wildflowers have been abundant. The pastures are still growing. And all of this beauty that I'm talking about I don't think we see how fragile it is. And I don't mean fragile in the environmental sense. I mean fragile in relationship to the moment in which we actually see the beauty. Because when we see something that is beautiful, like one of my favorite things to see, I love when the wheat and the tall grass dries out and the wind moves it, you actually see one of the many common forms throughout the universe. You see waves, beautiful waves, moved by something invisible. And is it not moving to see something like that? It is moving. It's fragile because it's that moment. That's it. The breeze stops. The beauty of that moment passes. Now something else takes place, and this is to the heart of the idea of the beauty, is that beauty is something that is never-endingly taking place on a kind of conditional dependency basis. Everything interacting with everything else. That's what beauty is. But when we sit and see beauty, when we're aware of beauty, the distinction between the beauty we see and the beauty that exists inside of us disappears. So the fragility of the beauty that we see becomes a part of our own fragility if we see it as such, which makes us sensitive human beings. Because now we're no longer caught up in a mind, which I'll describe in a moment here, that is forever trying to figure out how to get that beauty into a camera. Not that there's anything wrong with taking pictures. Or have you ever seen something beautiful and the moment you saw it, you thought, I got to go tell somebody about this. Then the beauty isn't the beauty you see, but it's the sense of yourself feeling beautiful for what's been shown to you. And that's not beauty. The fragility has gone out of it, and this is to the point. Have you ever seen something really beautiful, no matter what it may be, and we can take the most mundane to the most celestial, from the idea of wanting to buy something that you thought was beautiful to seeing something celestial. What does the mind do when for a second, let's just say a person is in this interaction, and that's a key word I want to get in. A person, when they're aware of the beautiful moment, is seeing something that is living and dying. Remember we talked about the little girl? The waves move in, the waves move out, and there's a pause. There's a relationship in that beauty, in its fragility, that when the person is participating in it, they're participating, and this is a key word now, in something that doesn't have a past. Beauty doesn't have a past. And that's part of what holds us in the rapture, because in the instant where awareness, untainted, which is synonymous with the direct relationship of it, when it touches that, for a moment we no longer have a past. This is why the breath stops, the inspiration takes place, because for a moment an individual is connected to something that already lives inside of him or her, but for the most part is never present to them because they're so pushed around by the content of their mind doing what? Here it is, trying to claim it. The mind is an extraordinary instrument. Never think otherwise. But its purpose is not to provide us with who we are and what we do. That is not what the mind is about. The mind inevitably is working through a series of events in itself, and I'm going to speak of in a time sense, but it's not really a time sense. It's just occurring. A person sees something beautiful. You look and see a beautiful mirror, throw rug or whatever it is. You see something that catches your eye, something beautiful. Ever see somebody beautiful catch your eye? Now what happens in the moment where you see something beautiful? It's instantaneous. There's pleasure that's produced by it. That's natural. But the instant that the pleasure is produced inside of the mind, there is a faculty in this order of mind that we presently have that wants to keep the pleasure in place. It wants to stop the movement of beauty and possess the beauty. That's what it does. It can't help itself. That's its nature. That's how thought works. So there's this instant of pleasure, this moment of beauty, and in that split second, the mind, in order to, claim it, frames it. in order to claim that moment, it frames it so it can detain it. Those are your key words. Frame, claim, detain. Let's look at it. Boy, I like that. Whatever it is, I like that. Now watch. I want the world to stop now. I want beauty to be, freeze the beauty part. Everything, that's it. Because I want to possess that. Now, what does it say it wants to possess? The mind is pointing out at the mural, it's pointing out at the woman, it's pointing out at the miracle, whatever it says that it sees, but it really isn't seeing that. It's seeing the image that was framed in the mind of that. And as it looks at the image that was framed in the mind, it's extracting from what it framed, the content of the experience, it's taking that out of the picture so that it can continue to experience what it has now claimed. And the moment that the sense of self is predicated upon something that the mind has claimed in order to possess so that my person can feel this pleasure continually, fear is born. And there's no getting around it. Because as long as the mind has this image by which it has defined the sense of self, then if anything threatens the image, in other words, the person or the mural or the possession or whatever it is, anything comes along and threatens that, you're monkeying with me. And don't you mess with me, because why? My life depends upon my toast being lightly browned. You have your problems, I have mine. Do you understand what I'm saying? That this element of fear is a continual product of a mind that produces images through which it can somehow claim the sense that was stored in them in order to go on being me. And now, when that ends, which it does, because like the girl in the story saw, see, it comes in, it seems to pause, and it goes out, but nothing is really standing still. Everything is going through this process of change, so that when a person looks at something like that, they don't know, because it feels real. This feels good, man, it feels good. I love whatever it is. I love it. And then, because the thing isn't what the mind has assigned it as being, I now am attached to something that is going to go through changes. And as it goes through changes, I look for ways to control that which was changing it. How many of you like to try to control other people's behaviors? Raise your hands. Master controllers, one and all. You're just fine as long as you don't change. Unless I've told you how to change, then we're going to be really happy together. There can't be true contentment. There can't be love where there's fear. It's impossible. And to recognize, if we will, in our own mind, the way that it works, frames the moment so it can claim it. It claims it so it can detain it. Is there anybody here who can stop nature? Can you stop the sun? Can you stop the light through the trees? No one can stop anything. But it's a complete act of delusion on the part of a human being that when they get in their mind what they're going to possess in order to give them the power of being whatever it is they've imagined they're going to be, they can't understand that it's an illusion until the pain comes. And then we still don't see it's an illusion because we just go back to sleep and dream up another one. That is limited, has its place, because it's part of the root of experience. I couldn't be speaking to you of these beautiful ideas if experience hadn't led me through seeing the things I'm describing to you. So there's nothing inherently wrong in any given moment, apart from the fact that we think that that moment is the only moment there is, and it better well freeze right there and not change, which is pretty much the way we work. Now, the other side of that is, and I hinted at it, and we're going to close the part of this talk with the idea, If that's a life of fear in which it is forever trying to fix itself by imagining yet something else to claim, that just drives us through what I call the circle of self, what is a fearless life? What is this other order of ourselves in which we're no longer subjected to a mind that first produces what will free it and that then becomes the slave of the freedom that it made for itself? What other kind of life is there? And I hinted at it when I talked to you about this beauty, the fragility of this beauty. I talked about the possibility of recognizing from something inside of ourselves that we can be in relationship with the moment. We can be in relationship with whatever it is. And this is what's so truly beautiful about it. Even moments like this. There's nothing that we can't be in relationship with that isn't giving us insight through our awareness into it. Nothing. So it doesn't matter. I'm not saying that there aren't right and wrong and quote things. I'm simply saying that when a person can be aware of himself and understand that the nature of awareness, because it doesn't live from something trying to find itself. Look, were you looking for yourself or that sense of beauty when you found the beauty? Were you looking for that wonderful feeling of love if you happen to have someone in your life and you have a true moment where none of you you're not hiding anything from each other, and maybe one of you is actually saying, you know what, I'm a mess. And you love the person for their honesty. You don't look for the moment of honesty, but your awareness of it and the honesty of the beauty, of the integrity of a person who's not lying and hiding things from others, in that moment you share through that awareness in that moment and movement of that which never was born and never dies. Because that living and dying, that in and out, that pause that isn't a pause but a change, that is the real core of this existence. It is what we're meant to live in and from through our ability to be present to ourselves. But we can't be present to ourselves as long as we're trying to possess ourselves. So the answer is this, and it all leads up to this. We're talking now about the difference between what happens when we realize that this part of ourselves, and if you feel fear, worry, stress, anger, any of these negative states, when they flood through and they capture you, it is an indication that you're trying to protect something. So when we feel those moments in which this state of protection surges in and tries to drive us to a promise to free ourselves through what it names will do it, instead of that continuation of that possession mentality, we participate in the release mentality. The release mentality. This is where letting go comes in. And this is where the risk, the real risk is, because we're so used to knowing ourselves through saving ourselves in time, that the idea of entering into a timeless moment, my awareness of it, and not letting myself jump in and tell me what to do and how to fix it, is terrifying to that nature. But to who we are, it is beauty itself. And we can, anytime we want to, do it right now, because we have to bring the talk to a close. You can wake up and start participating in this moment, not in thought, but through your awareness of it, and allow that awareness to help you release, 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 let go, let go. And then you watch how the fearless life that has always been present begins to dawn inside of you, and the life of fear begins to fade. You must do the work. Let's take a break.
Guy, after 9/11, after a variety of increasing terrorism attacks around the world, I'm afraid of terrorism. What might be your approach to how we as individuals or society can come to grips with terrorism or fear of it?
I think the first thing that all of us have to understand is that we're not mutually exclusive from the conditions that we encounter. That's first. I'm not a political person, and in truth, I don't have political views. I don't have a stance on such things because I have found the following to be true. First, and you must see this for yourself because I assure you it's true, you can't have a fear that isn't born of being identified with something your imagination has come up with in a negative sense. I'll say it to you differently. It's negative imagination at the root of fear. I can't worry about what will happen 1 minute from now without my mind projecting 1 minute from now. It's impossible. And it's so strange the way the mind works. It'll produce the negative image so that I can fear it and then tell me how to protect myself from the very thing that it generated in my unconsciousness. Then you have individuals who run around trying to build walls and protect themselves from something whose root is in all human beings. The reason that things happen the way they do is because we live without knowing it in the hands of this nature that differentiates us from one another because of what we can possess and get from the other. And if I was to speak of such things, I would talk about how we have come to a place where it seems that there's limited commodity on this planet, and that drives the wars and the terrorism and the other things that are generated in it. But I would argue strenuously that the commodity that's limited isn't the oil or those precious whatever it is, but it's our understanding that is the limited commodity. And until, sir, you and I and everyone else, right in the middle of it, let's take an example. Have you ever been attacked by somebody? Raise your hands. You know, it's like, you walk into an office, and so, you know what I'm saying? Or maybe the guy doesn't wash your windshield. Ever feel slighted because he washed someone else's windshield and didn't get to yours? I mean, it doesn't take a lot, does it, to feel as though something has been done to us that shouldn't have been done? Yes or no? What happens in the moment where I feel I've been attacked? I'm ready to strike back. And if I don't actually strike out at the person, I will strike out at them in my mind. My mind will hold the picture of the person. How many of you argue with people that aren't even alive anymore? That's an example. See, when the mind is occupied with an object that it's identified with, there's no discernment in such a mind. So it doesn't matter what it is that it's occupied with as long as it's driving this sense of ourselves and gives us something to do. So back to the question, what about 9/11? One can only wish that it didn't happen. But it did. But the fear that gave rise to it must stop now. Because if it doesn't stop now, there will be more and more and more of these events, because that's the nature of mankind, of womankind. I have a saying that a rolling thought gathers mass. So what does one do? Because I always bring this down to practical terms. Here I am, and I went someplace, and I was at a party, and I said the cleverest thing that I've ever said in my life, and no one noticed.
What was it?
See, I'm never that lucky, actually. See, if no one appreciates me, that's grounds for war. Because I know there's something inherently wrong with them. Isn't there something wrong with people that don't appreciate you? Raise your hands. Yes, there's something inherently wrong. If they don't recognize that whatever it is that I am, blow them up. So I have another expression, that the buck, the B, only I spell it B-U-C, the blast of unconscious conflict, B-U-C, blast of unconscious conflict. It stops here. The fear stops here. And but in order for it to stop here, and for me to participate in this fearless life, then in the moment in which it arises in me, I have to be present. I can't stress to you how important it is to learn what it means to be attentive to your own mind. Not as and because this is, see, the problem is that spiritual, there's so much spiritual knowledge. I mean, you can talk to anybody today and they're a virtual master. It's scary. Fearful, yeah. I'll admit it. When I see someone coming up about to tell me everything they know, I am in fear. In such moments where that uncomfortable negative disturbance comes up inside of us, let's equivocate it to that little girl in the water. It's moving this way. And our tendency is to want to counter it, to do something with the movement. If we do something towards the movement, then we're no longer participating in it. And when we participate in that movement, we change it by the fact of our awareness. I don't do this usually, but in my new book, Let Go and Live in the Now, there's one section in it that is worth the whole of it, because it talks about the fact that darkness anywhere is darkness everywhere. Darkness anywhere is darkness everywhere. That means that the darkness that I feel in me towards someone who speaks badly of me, towards the person who doesn't act appropriately, the moment in which life doesn't confirm my ambition or my wish, in the moment of that negativity, that energy, that negativity, that not understood movement is the same everywhere, in everyone, in all of time. No exceptions. But light anywhere is light everywhere. Which means that in the moment that I can be present to myself, attentive to my own mind, watching how it wants to make an impression, looking for approval, seeking some way to control something so that there's a sense of security, figuring out how to appear as though I'm not. How many of you are masters at being irritated and pretending you're not? To what end? By the way, I'm not saying act out the irritation, because that's what happens when you can no longer pretend. That's the flip side. When the hypocrisy finally boils over, then a person is reduced to an action that then they're sorry for. But the sorry doesn't change anything. What does? This moment in which the fear comes up in me over whatever it may be, no matter how seemingly powerful the possibility of loss, in such an instant, that person lets themselves see and be attentive to that darkness, that thought. All you do is watch it. You keep yourself present to it. Why? Because that awareness is a form of light. And that light of awareness changes the darkness that enters into it and that it enters into. So that means in the moment of awareness, if I'm actually doing my inner work and participating in the way we've described, every one of these actions by which I'm aware of myself and allow this other life, this fearless life, which is this light of awareness, I let that do its work. The darkness not only in myself as a temporary expression of it is changed, it's changed everywhere. Everywhere. For all of time, by the way. For all of time. See, I never have enough time when I'm talking. Even when I don't want to talk, I wind up not having enough time to talk. Because there's so much promise in what I'm talking to you about. But not promise as in something that's coming tomorrow. Not promise as something as a recognized sense of fulfillment that's relative to some other kind of pleasure we've had. But the promise of actually participating in what is an eternal life. And as a part of that, not being what compromises us as we seek a temporal sense of ourselves that we think is eternal but always betrays us because it passes. So, long answer. Start with recognizing that whatever the fear comes, the next time the fear comes up, just simply notice that it wouldn't be there if your mind wasn't being attracted to and associating with a fearful image. And then ask yourself, from where did this fearful image come? And then you'll see, my mind placed it up there. Well, what my mind produces, I can release. Any other questions?
This isn't a question, but Guy, I want to tell you, I got it. I've been in deep despair over the sinking of our world. And my answer to that, the way I fix it for myself, the way I frame it and claim it and retain it, I'm a landscape painter. And I go out with my digital camera and I take a picture and then I go home and I make it look as pretty as I can. And what's happened with when I came in tonight, I'm at a pause point in that cycle, and I've been walking around in circles looking at what's now become a burden, and I don't know what to do with it, but thank you.
Yes.
'Cause I got it.
You're very welcome. You're more than welcome. Yeah, just before you speak, again, because of the element of time, when the little girl was put in the water and the surge came in, and then there's this pause, and then the surge goes out and there's a pause. Do you know the whole of the universe works like that? Yeah. You study your breath. There's a pause at the top, there's a pause at the bottom. Even daylight and nighttime have in them a moment in which one is neither, so to speak. And this pause, and the reason I brought it up, and back to the gentleman in there, when we start, and may God help us all to be earnest in our sincere wish to become attentive to ourselves in the proper way, not absorbed in ourselves, properly awake to ourselves. When you come back into the room, you bring yourself into the present moment. There's lots of times when you bring yourself back into the present moment, and there couldn't be seemingly anything more boring on the surface of the earth. I'm here, now what? Is that all there is? But when you can start to understand through awareness that this movement is never not occurring, then when there is what seems to be nothing, it isn't nothing. It's you that wants something that has made nothing of it. And you have to stay, if you will, in that nothing, not because you're courageous, not because you're spiritual, not because you're a giant mentally or whatever it is, but because experience has finally proven to you that all of the movement the mind generates for you really goes nowhere. So when there's really nowhere for me to go that delivers the contentment that my heart of heart longs for, I'm left here. And it is the continual return to ourselves, to remembering ourselves in the moment, that allows us to participate in bits and pieces at first, because it takes tremendous energy. Oh, it takes energy to be attentive. And most of our energy is squandered in the pursuit of possessions or trying to protect them. So as that's expired in us, then we begin to have that energy that wasn't used for that purpose to remain to ourselves and fulfill the essential promise of this fearless life that was just waiting to be plugged in, so to speak. So don't mind the pauses. They're not really pauses, they're changing points, but you have to stay in them without trying to direct the change. Then you die to yourself, and in dying to yourself, you're actually participating in the living and dying of the beauty that we spoke of. Sir.
Yes. Before, when you were talking about appreciating beauty and the attachment that came to that, and when attachment comes, fear comes in.
Yes.
And I was looking at the progression of my life and how I've changed, and I'm happy with the progress that I've made, but I also don't want to get caught in the levels of the mind. The shift that's started to happen for me is where I have more of an attitude of trust, and it seems to be the antidote to the fear of losing whatever it is you're appreciating. But I know there's a difference between the level of the mind in that and the energetic state of beingness that you're
Yes.
trying to approach, and how do you discriminate between the two?
Here,
Was that clear?
that's for you. Just that you can begin to differentiate is a great sign. Because inherently, one recognizes, and this, how do you say this? We want to drive through and get the supersize and be done. Do you understand what I'm saying? Although I strongly recommend you don't go into those places. But that's the way the mind works. It's forever trying to solve what it calls the problem. That's what it does. The trick is that the me, this sense of I, that tries to solve the problem, that me didn't exist until the problem did. So this me, this I, is an effect, not a cause. An effect can't change anything except produce more effect. So the discovery of something like that allows me to risk what we've been talking about, which is what? Here I am, and I'm uneasy about, I have a date, I have a business engagement, I'm going to go give a talk to my business associates, whatever it may be. I'd like to be an artist, and I'm going to go to art class. Could be the smallest thing. And as I even, and this, have you not noticed this? The minute you even begin to think about something like that, all of the possible problems, I need to prepare. I need a new outfit. Speaking for my wife now. I need to trust. So it isn't that one doesn't lend themselves to what they think is the best thing for them to do, but they observe themselves do it. Instead of being identified with being a trusting person as opposed to a fearful person, because the trusting person didn't appear until the fear did. Do you see what I'm saying? He may not like what I'm saying, but do you see what I'm saying? Because here's what he's saying. Well, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but this is generally it. Well, if I'm not a trusting person, and I shouldn't be a fearful person, what on God's earth should I be? Because I have to be something, right? Do you understand? I want to know who to be when I'm meeting the moment. And I'm saying, don't be anyone meeting the moment, meet the moment. Your relationship with it will tell you what is necessary. And when you do what is necessary as given to you by your awareness of the moment, you can't hurt anyone in the moment. Compassion. Real compassion exists through a person's awareness of the whole of the moment, not my idea of being aware by which I ignore someone because I was trying to make an impression on someone else about how aware I was. You follow me? Look, we're down the road a ways, aren't we, spiritually? I mean, we pretty much tried A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down the line. So you can use your experience properly instead of living from a nature that wants to somehow or other protect the experience. It all has to go. It all has to go. But it has to go according to your understanding of it, not because you decide you're going to go sit on a hill and count pomegranate seeds or become a swami or whatever it is that you think is the next stage of your development. Look, you're not responsible for the next stage of your development. You're responsible to see the stage of development you have become identified with. That's what changes things. Is there any one of you, and if you can, I'm going to get out of my chair, I'm going to let you sit here, who can reach behind their back, get their shirt, and pull themselves out of the chair a foot high above the chair? Anybody here do that? Impossible. Why? We can't lift ourselves. Nor can we change ourselves, but we can place ourselves where change is taking place.
Like letting go of the trap keys right at the point of the pause.
Yeah.
Well, then who knows what's going to happen.
And who knows? And don't we? And we do. We want to know. This is a big problem. I say, I want to let go, but I want to know what's going to happen when I do it. Is that really letting go? Not really.
So tell us what's going to happen.
Go ahead, sir. No, it's all set. Let's talk right now.
Yeah. I'm just coming back to Ashland, looking for a place to live. But part of the reason I came back was I'm looking for connection. And I spent 2 months in Greece, an island by the sea, and it's very beautiful. But I felt I wanted connecting with people. And now I come back here, and most of the beauty's not here compared to what I had there. And I'm looking for connection, and I also need to find connection with myself. And then a neediness comes across, a desire, a pushiness, an emptiness.
Yes.
And I'm wanting connection, yet there's a suckiness that comes with it. How do I overcome that and create connection in a good way and create connection with myself?
First, just to highlight something he said, because it's a marvelous thing to recognize. Nothing is more unattractive than a person who wants to be attractive. Period. Nothing. And how many of you know that when you see someone who is trying to be, whatever Suave Bolo does that day, or Suave Boles, that when they're attempting to appear like something, and you know that they're not that which they appear, what is the natural action on the part of your mind towards someone like that? You may not want to admit it, but you pounce them, you judge them, and you want nothing to do with them because they're so unattractive in their wish to be approved by you. Now, you can see everyone else doing that, but you can't see yourself doing it. Because everybody we meet, something's going on. We want to be seen as something. Can you want to be seen as something and have a fearless life? Or is the very attempt to be seen as something the product of a nature that believes unless it's seen like that, it will lose something it imagined it was about to gain? Clearly, the answer is the latter of the two. If I want to be seen as something, I'm dead in the water before I start. I'm the only one that thinks I'm cool. So, next part. He said, a man wants to know, as do all of us. I recognize there's certain self-defeating behaviors that I do. How do I stop? Did you ever hear that old joke about the man who goes to the doctor? He says, doctor, I've got this headache and it won't go away. And the doctor says, put the hammer down. Probably told it bad. But the bottom line is, and this is really, if you want to have hope about something, but you have to pay for it, meaning with your inner work, no human being will consciously compromise himself or herself. It's impossible. All things that we do that harm ourselves, harm others, and harm the world, we do in a state of being unaware of ourselves. Period. That means that the degree to which I can be awake to myself is the same degree to which I won't participate in causing myself to ache in the hope of escaping an ache. Look, I'm alone. I don't want to be alone. I'm aching with my aloneness. My aloneness tells me what I have to do in order to not be alone. What does it say? Go impress someone. Go meet someone. go find a way to be in a group of some kind by which through my relationship with them I won't have the ache. Can you plant a lemon seed and grow an apple tree? No. So if the nature starts from the idea of some limitation, something incomplete, something fearful, something lonely, if I start from that and I try to answer that condition, the self that supplies the answers to it is part and parcel with the problem. So now what do? I learn what it means to watch myself instead of try to prove myself, no matter where I am. It doesn't mean that I simply stop going out, although I can tell you that some of the most valuable work you will ever do for yourself is discovering that by yourself everything is just the way it should be. Then if you have relationships, fantastic, because you are not attached to them to define you. Anytime you have a relationship with another human being by which you think that your happiness depends upon their proximity, you have a recipe for resentment and pain in spite of the promise that you hold in your mind through that relationship. Period. We've had the experience 10,000 times, but in the moment where push comes to shove, we would rather revert to the old behavior of letting this nature direct us instead of understanding. Look, I'll say it in simple words. I've gone as far as I'm going with this. This is where the spiritual rubber meets the road. I've been carrying a grudge, a regret, a resentment. My mind brings up a picture of something fearful for 5, 10, 20, 40, 50 years. And every time it does, I identify with it, I let it define me, and then out of that definition, I come up with a new path that will finally free me from that problem. And one day you see, that doesn't work. So when you know what doesn't work, you don't think to yourself what will work, you simply stop doing what doesn't work. Then you have come to the end of who you have been. And it is in the end of who you have been that the beginning of another understanding, a completely different order of yourself is born. Just as in beauty, when the life passes, there is death, and when there's death, there's birth. And it happens in a synchronistic movement. Now you have to prove this to yourself through your own inner work. Look, I'll slow it down and ask so it can resonate. Aren't you tired of being afraid? Now, I know when I ask a question like that some of you actually say in your mind, I'm not afraid. A fearless person never needs to say to themselves, I'm not afraid. Ever. Just as a strong person, a person with strength, never has to think to himself, what do I do to be strong? Weakness searches for strength. Strength doesn't look for strength. What is fearless doesn't look for something to make it fearless. That's the whole talk tonight. There has to be a clear cut, an exchange made between what I have understood to be myself as best I can see it in the moment, and then my willingness to test the waters, my willingness to go in the moment, and no matter, and one day this will be true for you. I pray it. I don't care what it costs me. Because if I have fear, I have nothing. Anything and everyone can compromise me if I have fear. And fear is always relative to an attachment that we have, and all attachments are connected to a sense of self that we want to continue. And such a world inside of ourselves will not bring an end to itself, it generates itself. But our discovery of that world within ourselves, through the light of truth, Christ, that ends it by changing it. And we participate not only in what is changing, but we as the body, the unique body. Another fascinating thing about human beings. Each and every one of us is a unique expression of the marriage of these forces. Which is why there can be true contentment and participation no matter where we are or whatever we're doing, even though, and I'll go back to the gentleman, it's not going to feel good. When you stop participating in what punishes you is going to pick up the pace and punish you more. It is. But you see, all right, I'm tuning down.
Deep breath.
Do what you want to do to me. If you can take it, take it. Because I don't want to be a man or a woman who, and then you fill in the blanks, spends their life looking for new ways to impress people, spends their lives trying to protect whatever possessions they've acquired because it proves to them they did something with your life. We're not on this planet to have done something. We're here to be that which is always changing things. And that's a completely different paradigm, if we can see it. Any more questions? In the back.
This is working again.
In the last couple of weeks, I came to this realization that I just needed to be clear and truthful in the moment with everything. So I started acting like that, and I just noticed everything started to change and reorganize in my life organically, like to where it was supposed to be, you know, like just naturally. But I had to let go of wanting some result, you know. But there's some interesting thing that started to happen because I have some friends that say, I'd like to reveal something to you confidentially. Like so-and-so just disappeared one day and went somewhere, but please don't tell anybody else this. And I was trying to understand this, how to deal with this, because it's like, okay, well, here I'm into this truth, and now somebody's telling me to not be open or restrict my behavior about being truthful in this situation because this person, they didn't want anyone to know that he just disappeared because he might have disappeared in a bad way for a bad reason or something. So what do you think about a situation like that? Should one be truthful in all situations, or is there time to keep secrets and to hide things? 'Cause this is...
I knew a great man. I spent 15 years working with him when he was alive, and his name was Vernon Howard. And Mr. Howard used to say, ask yourself these three questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Now, there's no such thing as sort of truth. And what you will see, and this is, remember, see, I have to continue, and I know I have to do it. Seeing where it is that I am caught in myself only troubles that which has caught me. Seeing where it is that I'm caught in myself only troubles that which has caught me. In other words, when I see something in myself that's dark, a limitation, a fear, that which troubles me about what has been seen is the thing that has been seen. We identify with that instead of recognizing that if it weren't for some light that wasn't part of what had exposed this, we would never see this. So we get caught in this circle in ourselves where we believe the conflict over seeing ourselves as being less than we imagine is true and bad, and this shouldn't happen. Why am I saying this? Because the only thing that troubles us in any relationship we have with another human being is what we want from them, period. And if you're around somebody who's telling you that you shouldn't speak of certain things because if you do, it's going to harm some group image or some idea or something else, not only should you not be around people like that as long as they demand your complicity, but that you should be integral, you should have integrity relative to your understanding and act the integrity in spite of the cost of it. then, because integrity has a root in something eternal, you will get the gift of acting as best you could from that integrity instead of compromising it for the sake of being part of a group that you hope to have an integral relationship with, because it can't exist there.
Yeah, I mean, it felt so good just to be real about everything in the moment. And this was like a little, this was like a, a stream going down the river, and then it gets caught in this, like a little dam. Oh, by the way, like, you got to hold yourself back, and that's, so.
How many of you want a disturbance-free life? Raise your hands. Do you understand that what we've been talking about tonight is the understanding that what we call the disturbance is just a phase of the creative life? That the disturbance is part of the beauty of it. But we don't understand the disturbance as being a part of the beauty of it because we're identified with what is being disturbed. So clearly, if I start to see that, I recognize, and this is something really promising, when I feel a disturbance of some kind, that's the moment for me to wake up, and instead of trying to protect the image or possession that feels threatened by that, now I'm going to participate in that by releasing that sense of myself, so that then I'm participating in this movement we were talking about instead of trying to control it.
I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. One more and then we're going to go home. You must risk everything every day. Every day, there is 1,000 opportunities where you can see something in you, framing it, claiming it, and detaining it, and you can be awake in the moment. I said no one will consciously compromise themselves. You can be awake in the moment to realize that there is stress and pain in this, and now stress and pain is telling me what to do to be free of it. You let go and risk what will become of you, in quotes, so that you can find out that the you have let go of was never you in the first place.
Yeah.
The way I've come to understand things is that whether we're trying to predict what the outcome will be from any experience, any event, in the next moment, or in 5 years, what the repercussions will be,
Yes.
or in cosmic time, is all rather fruitless. And therefore, at the root of what we're feeling in that moment is really a fear of being afraid, a fear of the fear itself. Whatever name or whatever disguise that fear may take,
Yes,
it's a fear of fear.
yes.
And that's the essence
Yes,
of it.
yes.
So, it's like once you recognize that, I think it helps to understand that whatever's coming, as you're saying, I'm coming to that with full presence and not with expectations that everything from now on will be black and utter destruction, because it never is.
No.
Thank you.
Agreed. My thanks to the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library for allowing me to come here tonight, and my thanks to you for being a nice group of people to share these ideas with. Good night.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.